So I hope you had introduced yourselves. It would be great to know who we are all working with whilst collaborating on this secret project. Okay, so let's begin first with what software and where to get that download. So if you search for Autodesk Maya, you'll see that this is the link you'll want to go to download the trial. Now, the trial lasts for, I believe, 30 days, and you'll want to download the latest 2017 version, which is also the version that I will be using, just so that we are all on the same page. Now, this is a very basic walkthrough, but if you want a full intro 3D lesson, best to get one that is fully dedicated to introducing you to the lay of the land in 3D space. This lesson is strictly focused on being a generalist and executing what you need to get the job, or in this case, the shot, done. Alright, so let's get started. Starting with our top toolbar. This is just like any other software where you access and have, different tools and options like file, edit, create, blah, blah, blah. And here's also where you just go in and change your workspace as well as access a bunch of editors. Now, the key difference between Maya and something like After Effects is that they have this special little tab right here. Now, if I click this drop-down menu and you change this, notice how the top bar changes. That basically means there's so much more options that Maya decide, or actually Autodesk, decide not to put them all at the top bar. If not, you kind of go insane trying to find what you're trying to find. Okay, now going to our left toolbar, this is where you kind of navigate your space. As you can see, if I hover over this, at the bottom, it will show what's going on, as well as a tooltip that will show up to show you what exactly it does. Now, we don't really have much to go on here to really do this, but that's just something that you might want to know. Now, moving down here, we have the little icons that control the viewports. Now, let's see if I click this, what happens? It basically tells us, okay, I want to change my viewport to a different view. So you see the 4 squares is 4 different views, orthographic views as well as perspective view, and a side-by-side view, and then you're just showing your outliner, which this little icon right here to turn on and off the outliner. So let's do a quick demo and actually create something so I can tell you how to navigate in this space. Just make sure that your drop-down tab is set to modeling, go to create, polygons, and make sure you uncheck this interactive creation. So let's just uncheck that and then go click on sphere. Now there you go. Now obviously with this in a scene, what you can do is if you have a mouse, if you're kind of using a mouse, you can zoom in and zoom out. If you're using a Wacom tablet, you can also kind of set your settings to allow you to zoom in using your pen. But I'm using a mouse right now because it's kind of easier to do this modeling using a mouse compared to a Wacom. So you want to rotate the scene, basically just press and hold Alt, and then using your left mouse button, click and drag around. See, I'm rotating around. If you want to center into this sphere, let's say you have multiple objects, you just click on this, which is just left mouse button click, hit on the F key, and it basically frames it up. Great. So now you see that I have this selected. What happens here is that to the right basically shows all my details of this particular model. In this case, it's a very simple sphere. Now translate X, Y, and Z. Now if you look at this little icon right here, that shows you the axes that exist in 3D space. A little bit of background is that the y-axis is basically going up, the z-axis is going in depth, and then the x-axis is basically going to the left and right. Now, this basically is the same thing as how you would control these. So, for example, you see, if I move this by 1, it goes in that direction, following exactly what my axes show, and as well as rotation. Now, you notice that when I click on these, some gizmo pops up in the center of my object. That basically allows us to interact with the object a bit more intuitively. So, for example, when you have this gizmo pop up, and just in case yours is not as small as mine, you can increase the size of this by hitting on the minus and the plus key. So I'm just going to increase the size a bit. And you can, of course, move this interactively in the scene without having to go here and adjust. Now, if you go down here to shapes, it basically tells us more details in particular to the shape of the model. And of course, the input is just the history of this model, and you can basically adjust some things like maybe the radius, you want to make it a little bit smaller or bigger, and it will be different for every single model you have, just so you know. Now, something else that is a little bit hard to see, especially if you're new, if you go to the right here, you can see these 3 additional tabs with word sideways, just basically forcing you to exercise your head and tilt your head sideways, just kidding. But anyway, if you click on Modeling Toolkit, it basically shows you what you can do with this selected item. And then, of course, more importantly, attribute editor, which basically gives you every single aspect of this model. Now, you think that that channel box is everything. It is actually not. The attribute editor is the one that actually allows you to edit the attributes of the model, including the shading, including the basic shading group. You don't have to go too deep into this. We'll actually cover this over the course of the creation of our shot. Now, just nice, moving down, if you go back to the channel box, you can see that there's these three tabs right here: display, render, and anim. So what display is basically means, okay, there's too much things going on. I want to hide certain things. So let's just say if I create this and I duplicate this, and I only want this object to be visible in the scene. I don't want to see this guy. So what I can do is create a new layer with this object, add the selected object, and then I can hide it. It still exists in the scene, but I'm just hiding it because there's too much clutter going on. You know, so much balls and so much spheres all over the scene. I just have to hide it. It's just too much for me. It's too much. Anyway, that's what display layers do. Basically, kind of like the shy layer in After Effects if you use After Effects. Now, render is different. Render is actually the one that allows you to basically control the different passes and the different renders that you want to do. We'll touch this in greater detail, but for now, just know that render literally means what it says it is. It's just rendering. And of course, animation, just to add different animation layers in case you have multiple characters. Now, speaking of animation, you see this timeline right here, as well as these two little buttons. That basically allows us to control the animation. You just basically go to each frame and set your keyframes, or you can control how much of a timeline you want to show. At the same time, if you click on this little icon, it gives you all the animation options for the particular timeline. Now, moving on, you see these two very small subtle bars here. Now, initially, remember we had something displaying bottom here that basically is just an additional bar to show you what's going on aside from the tooltip. But above here, this MEL basically means MEL scripting or Python. Now, if you're a script writer, and I don't mean the story writing kind, but actually the one that writes the script kind, you know, the code kind, you can actually type in a bit of code and automate your process if you want. And of course, here is where you show the script editor. And this basically is a combination of all that just now that you saw, and then everything that Maya does, from whatever operations that's open, all the way to what's being moved, etc., etc. Now, there's something important that I forgot to cover. It's basically this top bar right here, in between the viewport and the uppermost window bar, basically. Now, it's similar to what we have covered in the drop-down menu, but what this basically does is just put a visual to the shortcut of certain tools that also appear in the same menu. Now, in case you're a really visual artist and you just don't like to search for, let's say if I go to Edit Mesh, I was like, what's going on? What's all this? You can also find that same thing in this Workspace bar that allows you to basically access things a little bit more easier for you. And of course, lastly, we always talk about resetting our workspace and layouts. Now, if you mess it up, just so you know, there's always that Windows workspaces, and you can just set it to whatever you want. So let's say I want to do some rigging. I just click on rigging and see all the necessary tools are displayed. But let's just go back to classic. And I'm actually going to reset it just so that we're all on the same page. And there you go. Now you can obviously tell that Maya gives you a lot of options to do the same particular thing. So you can either access it at the top here, or over here, or using shortcut keys, and so on. And that should be about the gist of it. Still confused? Post your comments or questions in the discussion board. But for now, let's move on to creating our creature from scratch.